So as long as you don't print the hidden slides, then I think that would be very handy for everyone to have before they have their quiz on Friday. You guys ready for your quiz? You are right. Okay, good for you. That's good. All right. Now, the reason I went into that is that there are some things associated with wetland design that are just the same as wet pond design. So I'm not going to stress those things. I'll point them out. Like, yes, you need a forebay. All right, I'm going to do that. But I'm not going to stress that. All right. But when you get your PDFs, you will see the PDFs of the wetland design, and they will, you don't have to go back to the wet pond design to look for the appropriate slides. They will be in and among the wetland design as well. So let's take a look at a bunch of constructed stormwater wetlands. I just want you to look at them as we talk. Oh, this is a pretty cool picture. This is taken from the air. You can see this looks like it's a forebay. It's actually not. The forebay is in here. It's already sedimented in. All right. But you can see how the water flows across. There it is up close. That's pretty cool. This is up in our mountains. It's a small scale wetland, but works up in the mountains. You may have a spot that makes sense like this, something small. This is a larger one where it's flat. Water table's up near the surface. Oh, this is another pretty cool one. It's got two inlets. This one right here. And there is an inlet that's hidden by this tree. But there's also an inlet here. And you can see how the water snakes around in the wetland before it leaves. All right. That's a pretty large practice. That's about 8 hectares of a wetland, stormwater wetlands, not far, Sean, from your old house. And this is what it looked like when it was 2 years old. You can see the walkways in here. It's what it looked like 4 years later. Things are growing up. You still see a lot of different types of species in here, but 2, 6, okay. Wetlands do go through succession. How many of you have designed something already in your young careers? You designed something and you've seen it get built. Well, it is one of the very special things. This is my very first project, all right? So it's very special to me. You see 1998, it got installed. There it was 3 years later, okay? There it was 4 years after that. Here it was 2009. So I went to go visit it a few years ago, and there it is now. We'll talk about what you're seeing, all right? Here is what a wetland looks like in the winter. Here's the exact same wetland about 5 months later. Take a look at that one again. Boom, boom. Here's a step pool system. If you're on a slope where the wetlands are basically wetland cells that they cascade down to one another. So if you have a sloped area, you can make constructed wetlands if you wanted. All right. Here is an ultra urban one in Beijing. All right. Where they have certain plant species dedicated to certain geometric features inside the wetland. All right. Here's one in Cali. We talked about the Terminator earlier. When was that? Was that on Monday? We talked about the Terminator. Well, here it is. And what they're doing here is it doesn't rain in California for, it's a lot like here. It doesn't rain for about 8 months. And then for about 4 months, it does rain. Except the difference between the 4 months it rains in Rookie and the 4 months it rains in California, is that you get a lot more rain here in your 4 months than California gets in its 4 months. Probably about 5 times more. Okay. It's California is pretty dry. But you still see flow going on. Where do you think that flow's coming from? Why is there water in this channel when it probably hasn't rained in 4 to 5 months? You guys want to guess? Yes, there is some discharge of illicit discharge, a little bit of illicit discharge occurring. So there may be some wastewater in that flow. There's two other sources. You guys ever know that air conditioning produces condensate? If you have an air conditioning device, it's condensate. Southern California, there's a lot of people. They all have everybody's air conditioning. All right. So there's actually air conditioning condensate in there. And the American dream, for some reason, involves grass. So people will irrigate their lawns in Southern California, where, to be honest with you, the grass wouldn't normally live. That's why they have to irrigate it. And when people irrigate, they sometimes don't irrigate right, and extra water will actually flow from where they're irrigating into the storm drain network. And all of that water is what you see in this creek, concrete channel. Now, let me ask y'all a question. If you had to guess, would you guess that this water is generally pretty clean or generally pretty dirty? I mean, like, it's generally pretty clean relative to standard stormwater. I'm like, I think it's generally pretty dirty. It's generally pretty dirty. Okay? Which means that this water is perfect for treatment. It's relatively dirty. It's not like, well, I wouldn't drink it. You get seriously sick. I mean, it's pretty dirty water. But is it a high flow rate? Not particularly, right? And so if you could actually capture this water and send it to a wetland, you could have a significant improvement on pollutant load being discharged, in this case, to the Pacific Ocean. All right? And so what they've done in Los Angeles County is they will divert this low flow water into wetlands. See if I can get it to work. Try again. Into wetlands that are located to the side of the channel. All right. There's the space. And then once they've made the fix, there it is. So they basically they'll divert water from that concrete channel about 1 kilometer upstream. And that's how much fall you have to have, 1 kilometer upstream. And then they'll discharge it here. And then this will flow through a 0.5 kilometer long wetland and get cleaned. All right. So even in places that are semi-arid, or even in times where it's dry, a constructed wetland like this is particularly good at removing pollution. Now, I do not know what we're going to see today. All right. But if we see a trickle of water, just remember, a constructed wetland might be very happy with something like that. And we'll discuss in this next lecture, I'll get to it right before we leave today. I will discuss how to design a wetland based upon flow rate. Okay. Now, having said that, I've shown you a bunch of nice looking pictures, right? Most of you looked at those pictures and said, man, they look good. But guess what? Sometimes a designer intends the wetland to look like this. You know what my children are? They get upset. Like, Dad, why do people design wetlands like this? It's terrible. That's my second son now. He's a much taller boy. We'll come back to why that happens just a little bit. All right, so where is a good place to put your constructed wetland? Right off the bat, places where the water table is within about 1 meter of the surface. You know what? That's a great place to put a constructed wetland, especially when you have enough space and it's flat. Okay? So if the place you're wanting to put your stormwater control measure is flat and the water table is close to the surface, woo boy, that is Mother Nature telling you that you should be putting a wetland right there, or perhaps a wet pond. All right? The selection of stormwater control measures is actually not, as we say at home, it's not rocket science. All right? Meaning that is giving homage to rocket scientists. They really should call it rocket engineers because they're the ones that actually build the things. That it all is pretty obvious. Like, well, if it's flat, you're near the water table, and you're worried about nutrients, I think I'm going to put and you have enough space, I'm going to put a wetland up. All right. That tends to be how it goes. So, wetlands, we talked about the pollutant removal mechanisms. This is just a revisit to that very quickly from Tuesday. All right. Wetlands are good at sedimentation, gross filtration, not filtration proper, but gross filtration. They do have absorption, though the absorptive sites do eventually fill up. They have plant uptake. They're very good at microbial processes, and you can design wetlands that are particularly good at killing pathogens. You just have to have zones of your wetland dry out. And so one of the things I mentioned on Tuesday is that if you can identify the pollutants you're concerned about, then I can not only pick a practice that's good at removing those pollutants, but I can adjust the design of my practice so that it's better at removing those pollutants. So a classic case of if I'm trying to get rid of pathogens is I'll design my wetland to actually be just a few centimeters, a lot of the wetland just a few centimeters above the internal water table, so that in between storms it dries out. It's still a wetland, but it dries out, and therefore pathogens can be killed due to desiccation or drying out. All right. So again, there are things that I can do to my wetland to sort of optimize its pollutant removal performance. All right. So now let's talk briefly about, I'll show you a couple of examples of how well wetlands work. We had a wetland that we studied here, and at this school, that's what it looked like where we did the study. So this is the design that the student made. This is what got put in the ground. Not bad. All right. And these are the data. Oh yeah, we collected water from the inlet. We collected water from a chute once we cleaned that up. And we collected water from the outlet structure. All right. The red bars are your inflow concentrations. And by the way, those are some pretty big numbers. 25 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. That's a big number. That's a big number. There's no other way to put it. All right. And then the blue bars, well, that's what left the wetland. Do you need to be a research scientist to figure out that the wetland did a good job of removing nitrogen? No, you don't. Because every time the red bars are bigger than the blue, are a lot bigger than the blue bars. How about for phosphorus? Same story. Red bars a lot taller than the blue bars. This wetland did a really nice job of removing nitrogen and also phosphorus during 24 different storm events. All right. And I showed you this on Monday where we compared constructed wetlands to naturally occurring wetlands. And just to remind you that the constructed wetlands worked similarly to the naturally occurring wetland. Not exactly the same, but similarly, except for one. You guys see the one I'm talking about? One of those 7 man-made wetlands or anthropogenic wetlands. Which one was it? The red triangle one? Yeah, it's the red triangle one. Exactly. So you got the red triangle one, like, hey, Bill Hunt, what's up with the wetland represented by the red triangle? Some of you are like wondering that. How many of you guys are pessimists? Any pessimists in the room? How many of you are optimists? Yeah, I'm an optimist too. Engineers, they say, well, I'm a realist. That's fine. You can be a realist. You guys know the difference between the optimist, the pessimist, and the engineer? The optimist, the glass is half full, right? The pessimist, the glass is half empty. The engineer, The glass is twice as big as it needs to be. All right, fine. You can use that joke. I did make it up. I made it up right there on the spot. No kidding. I'm sure someone else has made that joke up, but okay. I have to remember that joke for later. The red triangles, the wetland in that case was too small. In fact, I'm going to show you about how to design these wetlands. That wetland was about 20% the size of the design standards. Okay? So what does that tell you? One, you need to follow the design standards, right? The design standards are there for a reason so that the practice will work particularly well. But secondly, if you're that small, what are you not providing enough of? Because the design standard is designed to give you enough contact time, right? So if you're 20%, 15, 20% actually of what it should be, guess what you're not doing? You're not giving enough contact time. And that's why the concentrations were appreciably higher. They never had a chance to get low because they weren't exposed to the wetland treatment processes for long enough. Moreover, remember I showed you the pond where the inlet was here and the outlet was here, and I said that's good? Well, this particular wetland, the inlet was here. The wetland was, this was the wetland. The inlet was here. The outlet was here. So it also, not only was it undersized, but had very short contact time, very close to the outlet structure. So it just doesn't work, right? So just because you put something in the ground and it looks like a wetland doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work great, all right? But on the flip side, the optimist in me is like, guess what, Bill? 6 of the 7 did. That's right. Okay. I planned to stop here when we're going to do T, but I didn't make it. Now let's talk about this one right here. What do you think is wrong with this picture? Why? Well, the picture's fine. Why did this wetland crash and burn? And this is something I learned from my agricultural engineering degree that honestly I did not learn from my civil engineering degree. Okay, I got my graduate degrees in ag engineering after getting my bachelor's in civil water resources engineering. Y'all see this soil right here? Would you guess that soil is fertile or sterile? Sterile. That's right. One of the things in ag engineering that they teach you how to grow plants, crops, maize, for example, wheat, right? Soybeans. And you learn about soil fertility as a part of that discipline. In civil engineering, I learned about soils. But you know what I learned about soils? I learned how to beat the crap out of them to make them strong enough so you could put a pier for a bridge on it, right? And so there's 2 different ways of looking at soils. The CE way is so I can build structures on it. The ag engineering way is so that I can grow stuff in it. Well, guess what? This was designed by someone that didn't think about growing stuff in it, right? Growing plants in it. And so it lacked a growing media. So one of the things you need to do with a constructed wetland is, and I should say, eventually, if it's in there long enough, eventually a wetland will collect enough organic matter that you will get stuff to grow, all right? But nobody wants to start off with something that looks that barren and that desolate. And so with a constructed wetland, it's important to amend the soil with something to help promote growth. We have standards, darn it. Don't worry about the 12 inches and all that jazz. Just make sure you amend the soil of the wetland so that you can, with something organic to promote growth. Here's a classic case. So I'm just going to move on and hit a couple of things here. Here's an inlet. Here's an outlet. They're right next to each other. Like, ooh, that's a problem. But the reality is the water flows all around this berm before it leaves. So the inlet and outlet are actually extremely far apart. I will show you this wetland a little bit later because we've monitored it, all right? And there's an example of that berm. Remember I talked about forebays? What do forebays do? 2 things. You tell me, you got them right the first time. I just want to because I'm going to ask you this question tomorrow. This question is going to be on the test without question. What do forebays do? Name one thing a forebay does. Okay, I think you got both. It slows the water down and it traps coarse sediment. Slows the water down, takes the velocity, takes energy out, traps coarse sediment. That's what wetlands do. Forebays do. You need to have a forebay in a wetland, right? And there's future stormwater control measure inspectors right here figuring out what's going on. All right. So here's your energy dissipation zone. Here's your removal zone. So the forebay of the wetland has a part that the energy gets taken out, and then a part where the deposition happens. And it's roughly 15% of the surface area. It says 10 to 15, but we want it typically to be about 15% of the surface area. That's what we found is about the right size in North America, okay? Based upon our coarse sediment loading and based upon a frequency that we are comfortable with scooping out the sediment. So every 5 to 10 years, property owners are okay scooping things out every 5 to 10 years. All right. You may be okay scooping them out 2 to 5 years. All right. Just be mindful of that. And plus, there does come a point where you can't make the forebay any bigger because you got to get access to it. I just think if you use a forebay for a wetland or a wet pond in India, based upon what I've seen on my just 2 visits, admittedly, to the country, I think you're going to have a higher sediment load coming in, which means you're going to have to clean it out a little bit more frequently. All right. And then the general idea behind a forebay is it's deeper where water comes in and it tapers up to a shallower. That helps facilitate energy removal and sediment deposition. Now, wetlands also have to have areas inside them besides the forebay where the water is a little bit deeper. Not a lot deep. I'm going to skip by why because of time, but basically something about a half a meter deep. You want these little pools in here to be about a half a meter deep. Why do you need pools scattered about a wetland that are a half a meter deep? What if I told you that critters live in there, insects? What type of insects do you want living in deep pools in the middle of a constructed wetland? How many of you want mosquitoes living in that? There you go. Okay, good. We're on board with that. We don't want mosquitoes. So what type of critters do we want in there? Critters that eat mosquitoes. That's correct. And there is also a little fish here, and it's from Asia. We have it in North America. It's called gambusia. Gambusia. Have you ever heard of gambusia? It's a little fish in North America. It's called a mosquito fish because guess what it likes to eat? Mosquitoes. And so by putting those deep pools in there, you're given a space for gambusia and then other things, insects notably, that like to eat mosquitoes. You're giving them a place to live. All right? Does the wetland otherwise have to have those deep pools to function? No, the wetland would be fine without the deep pools for removing pollutants. It'd be fine. But the deep pools, one, can make it look better because you get a diversity in vegetation. But very importantly, it helps provide a place for mosquito predators to live so that they can prey upon mosquitoes, because that, y'all, is something that people are going to really care about. I'm going to skip through a couple things. I already told you it was a half a meter deep. All right. Trash racks, same story. There are parts of the wetland, most of the wetland, if you're designing a wetland to remove nitrogen, which is what we usually do. That's usually our reason to use wetlands. The majority of the wetland is about ankle deep water. Okay? We call that, this is a very fancy name, the shallow water zone. Does that make sense? What is that? 10 centimeters? The majority of the wetland is 10-ish centimeters deep because that's where the plants that you see on this, that's where they can grow. They're happy there. All right? And it's in that zone that that denitrification is occurring. All right. So that's an important zone in a wetland. It again, its maximum depth would be 15 centimeters, but its average depth is going to be somewhere between 5 and 10 centimeters. All right. This is a bit of a challenge with wetlands because you do want to make sure you get those depths right. You don't want those depths to be high and dry. So if your orifice elevation is off 5 centimeters too low, then a chunk of this is going to be dry and it's not going to do its job of reducing nitrogen. And if your orifice depth is 5 centimeters too high, then it's going to be too deep and you actually might even struggle with plant growth towards the edge of it. All right. So this is one of those cases, most of the time in the stormwater world, we have some flexibility. All right. You can be off a few centimeters and it's really no big deal, except for maybe you're parking. All right. But in this particular case, you want to be able to get that water level about right. And I'm going to share with you in a little bit how we do that. Okay. One, you could just do a really good job of surveying and constructing. All right. The other one is you can have an adjustable outlet structure. And you see that wheel right there? This wheel you can spin and to make your wetland 5 centimeters deeper or 5 centimeters shallower. So that enables you to compensate for potential errors in construction. Not huge errors. I mean, if they're off by a meter, that's not going to, and that's a problem across the board. But if you're off by 2 or 3 or 5 or even 7 centimeters in grading the floor of the wetland, this outlet structure enables you to fix that as the designer. And so we do this a lot. Sometimes you use a wheel. This one is a little harder to tell, but we have these boards that basically slide in on top of each other. They stack on top of each other. And if we need to adjust it by 10 centimeters, we'll literally just take one of those 10 centimeter tall boards out or add a 10 centimeter board in. All right. So in North Carolina, we have what we refer to as adjustable outlet structures. Why don't we have this for a pond? Because you know what? It really doesn't matter for a pond. You're off by 5 centimeters in a pond. Whoop-de-doo. But in the wetland, you're off because the grades matter so much for plant growth that you want to be able to get within 5 centimeters, usually 2 or 3 centimeters of what was on the plants. All right. I just want to make sure everyone is comfortable with that. It is an important point about constructed wetlands. Okay. And then you've got the area in the constructed wetlands where the water will pond up, all right, and stay, you ready for this? For 2 to 5 days. You heard that one before? Yep, I know you have. 2 to 5 days. And so that's the area above the normal pool where this elevation here is about 40 centimeters. So go up to 40 centimeters. And that is okay. Now, why do you think we picked 40 centimeters? So when it rains, the water level goes up to 40 centimeters. Why don't we make it, I don't know, 80 centimeters? Why don't you think we make it 80 centimeters? There's one really good reason. And when I get my plant people in the room, which we aren't, and that's okay, plant people know right away. Because 80 centimeters, 0.8 meters, that's a lot of water to put on top of a plant. And especially if it keeps coming up and down, it basically makes plant growth very hard. We used to say 30 centimeters at the max. All right. 30 centimeters is better than 40. Guess what's better than 30? 15. If you're trying to get your plants to grow, 15 is better than 30. 30 is better than 40. 40 is a lot better than 80. If we could make it 50 centimeters, we would. But you know what? 40 is actually a lot better than 50. And so that's why we cap it at 40 centimeters. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit why that 40 centimeters is such an important value, because it dictates the size of your wetland. All right. The water quality volume. So what you see here is blue on that screen. That's the normal pool. Does everyone know what normal pool is? I realize I should have made that clear. Normal pool is the elevation of any reservoir. It could be Lake Mead outside of Las Vegas. All right. All the reservoirs you have here in India. All right. The normal pool that's the elevation of the water before a storm. All right. That's normal pool. Everything above normal pool is where you store your water quality volume. So your water quality volume, that which is associated with the 35 millimeter storm here in Roorkee, India, that's what's getting stored in that 40 centimeters above normal pool. All right. I wish we could make it 50, but we can't. At least in North America. You may have species of plants that do better with 50 than we do. Or maybe you don't. I don't know. But 40 is the number that we roll with there. All right. Temporary inundation zone. This is where you want your wetland to dry out so you can kill pathogens. If you're worried about pathogens, you're going to have this be a larger fraction, a larger portion of your wetland. Okay. If you're not worried much about pathogens, they're going to have it be a smaller fraction of your wetland. All right. So the shallow water zone, oh yeah, I actually went through that. Oh, you know what? I was going backwards. Like, what's happening, Bill Hunt? Drawdown time. Drawdown time, 2 to 5 days. You know why we have it. There it is, 2 to 5 days. I'm going to skip through that. And there we go. Here's your outlet structure. I'm going to go through this actually pretty quickly because there's a couple other things I want to share with you. All right. Water is released from wetlands through orifices. All right. And I'm pretty convinced that whoever the designer of this pond was, this wetland was getting paid by the orifice. All right. If you can ever make that gig happen for you, go for it. What's a reason to pull water from lower in the water column? See, the intake for that low flow orifice is sunk, I don't know, let's say about 15 centimeters into the water column. You see it pretty clearly here. Why would you do that? Because we do it a lot. What do you think the biggest problem is with a wetland that has an orifice this big? Say it real loud. Clogging. Clogging. That is the biggest problem. And so if you put your intake 15 centimeters down, guess what you're limiting? Clogging. Anything that's floating isn't going to get access to that low hole. All right. So that's the reason people do it. You also can release cooler water, but that's not the, you know what? I realized the answer was sitting there up on the screen the whole time. But I know you knew it. If you read it, power to you. That's good enough. I'm going to get rid of this thing. I don't think it wants to get rid of. All right. Not to get into all the details here, but how often do I let engineers make the decision on landscaping a wetland? Hardly ever. Do you know why? You guys don't be hurt by this, because we're not good at it. That's not what we're trained to do. Engineers are really good about taking a basin and routing storms through it. We're really good at that. We're good at developing layouts, like topographic layouts, but man, plants are not our gig. But the good news is there are professionals out there that know a lot about plants. All right. Now, I will sometimes do it if it's a small project and it doesn't have a lot of public contact. But most of the time, I'm going to get professionals to help me with plant layout. All right, so just know that there's guidance associated with that. In that guidance, one of the most important things that we do share, though, with the plant people is to not purposefully put typha in there. Now, I know you've got typha because the world has typha. Why do you think I'd be like, I don't want any of that? What is it? What is it that, why would I not like typha? It's naturally occurring. Have you ever looked at a facility that has typha in it? It takes over. It takes over. And it crowds out essentially all the competition. It's like a bully plant. Imagine if a plant could be a bully. Typha is a bully. And once typha takes over, guess who is protected? Guess what's harder to be eaten? That's right. So we are very careful not to put typha in. And when we talk about maintenance, we spend a lot of time on maintenance. The first year to 2 years of a constructed wetland, we go in and we clear out the typha. As it shows up, we clear it out and give the plants that we want to survive the best chance. I have found that in North Carolina, you need to do that 2 years. And then after that, your plants are so well developed. They have such a strong presence that we don't have to worry about the typha. I would still look for it, but we don't have to really worry about it, which is pretty nice. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to talk briefly about how you figure out the surface area of a constructed wetland. All right. There are 2 ways of determining your surface area. One is what I refer to as catch and release. It is a volume-based design. I'll explain it up here on the board. Got that taken care of. I'm going to move this down a little bit. A little bit easier for me. I just love having a chalkboard, man. All right. You might think I'm about to draw a leaf, but guess what? What did I just draw right here? A catchment. Right. So here's your catchment. Okay. It's going to come to this spot right here where we want to put, I'm going to abbreviate it, a constructed stormwater wetland. All right. The catch and release, or the volume-based design, is very simple. The surface area of this practice is based on the water quality volume, all right, being held in this footprint instantaneously. All right, meaning, so in this particular case, we've got 35 millimeter event. Let's say, I won't go through the calculation, but let's say on this catchment, that 35 millimeters that falls across this catchment yields 10 millimeters of runoff. Okay? Let's say the size of this catchment is 10 hectares. Someone do me a quick favor and multiply 10 hectares by 10 millimeters and tell me how many cubic meters we've got. Some of you, I'm sure, have a calculator. Do that for me, all right? So 10 hectares times 10 millimeters. Talk amongst yourselves. When you get the answer, shout it out for me, and I'll put it up here. (1,000 cubic meters? Yeah. I probably should have been able to figure that one out on my own, but I've been up here talking. Okay, so this is my water quality volume. All right. So the idea is that 1,000 cubic meters, all right, get stored in your constructed stormwater wetland instantaneously. Is that what really happens? No, right? Because the 1,000 cubic meters finds its way to the wetland from that catchment over the course of the duration of the storm, right? But in this calculation, we assume that all the water arrives instantaneously. Now, what do you think of that design standard? Is that good? Thank you so much, ma'am. Do you like that idea? It's simple, right? It's simple. But what does that design do, you think, to the surface area of your wetland? Does it make it bigger it needs to be, smaller it needs to be, just right? What do you think? I heard it. Bigger. It makes it bigger. The reality is it could be a little bit smaller. The design community in North Carolina understands that it makes it bigger, but they still accept it. Do you know why they accept it? It's because stuff happens in these systems that isn't planned. Sediment gets deposited. There's detrital buildup, all right, that occurs. And so that with time, the wetland probably doesn't store as much water as it was initially intended to. So in the end, the design community is like, okay, it's a simple calculation, but it's also a conservative calculation that allows for some things to change. People might argue it allows some things to mess up, all right? But it allows some things to change, all right? So really what the calculation is about is the surface area. We might as well finish it. I've got 1,000 cubic meters being stored in my constructed stormwater wetland, and I need to know how deep I'm allowed to pond my 1,000 cubic meters in my constructed stormwater wetland. Would anyone like to guess what that value is? And I'll give you a hint. We've talked about it. Water comes in, it builds up over the normal pool, and how high do we let that water get during a water quality event? I think I heard it. 40 centimeters. That's right. And so in the end, the surface area calculation is, is actually this easy. You take a look at your water quality volume, divide through by your average depth, and you get your surface area. In this particular case, we have 1,000 cubic meters. I feel sorry for this chalk because I'm murder on chalk. All right, 1,000 cubic meters divided by what number? This is a trick question. Divided by what number? You want to say 40 centimeters or 0.4 meters, don't you? I know you do. But I'm asking this and I'm making it sound tricky, trying to bait you into saying 40 centimeters. But guess what? You don't use 40 centimeters. You know why? What is this? What am I asking for? The average depth. What's 40 centimeters? The maximum depth. So exactly what your average depth, you don't know. I mean, we don't know right now. You can determine it. And based upon a few that I have done, an average depth is probably much closer to something between 32. I almost hesitate to use 35, but I'm going to do it. 35, in fact, let me make it meters. 35 meters, 35 centimeters or 0.35 meters. That would be an average depth. After, you have the water in the area that is above the water that plants are growing and stuff like that, it ends up being about 0.32, 0.35 meters. We're going to go with the higher number. And so in the end, what is the surface area? Based upon this, what's your surface area? Say it real loud. 2,800, you said 67? 57? I'm sorry about the squeak. 2,900 meters squared. Okay. I appreciate the extra precision, but I really should just put 3,000 meters squared. I'm probably being overly precise even with that, but we'll go ahead. 2,900 square meters. That's how big the wetland would need to be to treat the water quality volume for a 10-hectare catchment area. Okay? And so if I'm guessing this means, does this mean it's 2.9? That means the constructed stormwater wetlands surface area, so the SA is approximately 3% of the catchment. And that's actually about right. We're just kind of drawing these numbers up, but that's usually what we get as well. 2%, 3%. I've seen some it's up to 5% if it's a heavily impermeable catchment. But that is how you calculate how big your surface area is. So today, when we go out to outside of campus, we're going to identify a spot. We're going to see how much space is available. All right. And then we're going to, I don't know if we have to guess or the numbers are going to be available, educated guess, or the numbers available. You're going to figure out what the catchment size is. We'll figure out what the runoff coefficient is for that catchment. And then we're going to apply 35 millimeters of rain to it. And then we'll see if we can fit the water quality volume in the designated space. That's essentially what this afternoon's excursion is going to be all about. Okay? Now, I just went through on the board what my slides go through, but I'm going to skip some of the slides because I think it was better for me to teach that off the board. But I do want to talk about some other very interesting thing that we learned. So I want you to see where wetland design is going. So I'm going to show you data from 2 or 3 wetlands, okay? I've already showed you some data. I'm going to come back and show you some more. We did a study here, and we had a catchment. And in this catchment, we ended up having a wetland that had actually 3 different cells, okay? Cell 1, and that was cell 1 and cell 2. All right, there was 3 different cells. The majority, I know it's imperial units, but the majority was in the first cell, but the second 2 cells, when added, were about 40% of the total surface area. So they weren't insignificant. So the water came off the catchment, got diverted to these cells, since it flowed from cell 1 to cell 2 to cell 3 and then out. Now I want y'all to look at this and tell me, what do you see? Here's the water in. This is the water that leaves cell 1. the water that leaves cell 2, and the water that leaves cell 3. That's for TSS. You can see turbidity. What do you see here? What do you see? Let's put our feet back into the developer's shoes. Okay, the developer, what's the developer interested in doing? Complying, but doing so in a cost-efficient manner. Okay, that's how developers roll. I'll comply. What's the most cost-effective way for me to do so? If the developer looks at these data, what do you think she thinks? Is she like, boy, I'm glad I have 3 cells of a wetland? How many think, oh yeah, I'm thrilled I got 3 cells? Okay. Or do you think the developer's like, I could have 1 cell and do a pretty good job? You know what the developer is going to say? The latter. She's going to say, I could have 1 cell and I could have saved me a lot of money. All right, you say, well, okay, but that's for sediment. That's for turbidity. It also held true for the record for phosphorus. It did not hold quite as true for nitrogen, that there was some additional benefit of the second cell, but even then, the vast majority of the improvement occurred in the first cell. So, what this study says is that, hey, maybe our wetland design, remember I told you the wetland design is conservative? Okay? Maybe it's too conservative. All right, well, there's other ways of looking at those data. We did another study. This one was a very big wetland. The wetland itself was 11 hectares. The watershed was about 400 hectares. So a very big watershed. All right. 350 to 400 hectares. Water got pumped into this wetland, and the water flowed through here and around. The water also got pumped through here and around. And we monitored where the water came in, and then when the water left this first point, the water left this second point, and then as it left, total. This is the water coming into the wetland. This is the water as it left here, and here's the water as it left here. And what do you see? By the time you got to the end of the first cell, all the improvement had occurred. Whoa. That's the same kind of thing that we just saw. And guess what? We might as well go one more time. Here's my wetland in Lenore. All right. Whoops. Water flows in. We had an inlet collection. Pass number 1, pass number 2. Then there's a flow. We got it at the back. And guess what happened again? By the time you got to the first monitoring station, this one, almost all the improvement had occurred. For most of the pollutants. There's a couple of exceptions, but most of the pollutants. What does that tell you? This is 3 different wetlands. And by the way, it's hard to monitor. It costs money to monitor these things. So I've got 3 examples where I show the exact same thing. All of these wetlands, if you're worried about pollutant removal, now it's different if you're trying to mitigate flows, okay? But if your concern is pollutant removal, all 3 wetlands were too big. At least if you're paying for it. I guess if you're trying to get the lowest number you can, they weren't too big. But for those people that if you're paying for it, you're like, can I just have it be 40% as big? Well, the reason this is the case is that this particular wetland, and by the way, 36 storm events is not nothing. That's a lot of events. These systems were flow-based, all right? If you go into the wastewater world, and I mean, y'all are treating wastewater here and then using it on the grounds for fertigation. In the wastewater world, there is a wholly different design methodology, and it's based on flow rate. So when they build a wastewater wetland, they base it on flow rate, okay? And the idea is that with certain types of wetlands, you could base them on flow rate too. Certainly, an offline system like this, and I'll show you an example of one that we're actually pumping in just a little bit. It's an offline, or it's next to a creek and the pump comes on and it pumps water into the wetland and the wetland water flows to the wetland for treatment. Totally different way of designing, and it's actually very similar to what I talked about in Los Angeles, where they're diverting that low flow into this long treatment wetland that runs parallel to the canal. Or as I said before, let me go back here. You could put, this case, the water is diverted in, but what if you have no diversion? You have a pump housing, and then you turn your pump on. Let's see if the video goes. Yep, you turn your pump on, the water's leaving this creek here, the pump comes on, and it's spilling the water into the wetland for treatment. You guys hear me? I just got excited apparently and screamed it off. Or it's batteries for this, but I'm okay for a little bit. So if there's a new battery, that'd be great. Oh wait, I know what I can do. Oh, I can do that. Whoa, that's loud. Holy crow. Okay. So how are flow-based wetlands designed? Well, they basically follow a first order decay. So the longer you keep your water in your wetland, the more it approaches a standard effluent concentration, like there's a benchmark you're going to hit, all right? And so the C star is very important because it basically says that you're not going to get, like for nitrogen is a good example. Can you realistically expect to release 0 milligrams per liter of nitrogen from a natural system? No, because nitrogen is a nutrient that is found in nature. Remember those 3 N's, all right? And so wetlands discharge nitrogen. That's just normal, all right? And there's background nitrogen. And if you can have the most pristine stream coming out of the Himalayas, all right, it's going to have nitrogen in it. There's no problem. It's fine. And so a first order decay essentially says, and I'm going to, first order decay says, thank you for doing that. Oh yeah, great. So thanks a million. Perfect. What the first order decay says is that you have a concentration, that this is the background concentration that you'll find in nature. Like it's not going to get any better. Let's say for nitrogen, I'm going to go 0.6. That's not altogether bad. That's a pretty good number to use, okay? And you have 1 milligram per liter of nitrogen come in, that what's going to happen is that it's going to decay en route to 0.6, all right? And so the question is how long does it get to that point? Or if your target, if you're like, I'm good with 0.8, all right, how long does it take to get to 0.8? So time is down here, all right? That, I'll scoot this up for everyone to see. That's the principle behind first order decay, all right? And so in the end, what we're actually trying to figure out is how long do we need to keep our water in the constructed wetland? Or in other words, at what flow rate are we allowing the water to be in the wetland for a sufficiently long detention time so that we hit target effluent concentrations? That's an entirely other way to design and construct a stormwater wetland. And it takes advantage of the fact that our wetlands are probably bigger than they need to be to deliver the good, which is a good thing for you if you're trying to retrofit a wetland in. All right. So what we ended up doing is we had a bunch of data we collected over the course of North Carolina, and we basically ran this first order decay equation, and you can see for TSS, we had really, I mean, that's good data, not 0.91 R squared, even the validation 0.744 is not bad. Phosphorus 0.88 during the calibration, validation 0.78, not bad. And curiously, in the nitrogen model, the validation exceeded the calibration. So is it perfect? No. Is it pretty good? Yeah, it's pretty good. If you're flirting with your validation numbers all around 0.8, you're like, yeah, that's pretty good. So then what we did is we took that information and we basically reset that equation for our North Carolina experience to either solve for detention time or solve for wetland area. All right. Again, I'll print this out and share with you, but there is a second talk I need to give today. So a third talk I need to give today, I want to cut to in a second. All right. But you can see essentially what we did is we got our standard influent concentrations, okay, CN, our standard effluent, our target effluent concentrations out, and then a retention time that we calculated for these wetlands that you had to have to get certain thresholds. And then you can put all of that into a recalibrated version of the first order decay equation, which is this one right here, okay? And you end up getting these certain surface areas. And basically, depending upon the pollutant, and this happens to be sort of luck that the numbers are that similar. They can be more divergent, all right? But if you're worried about both nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, you run the detention time that you need to have them there and the concentrations you're trying to hit. And in all those cases, you end up getting something close to 10,000 cubic meters of surface area. You pick the one that's the most restrictive, in this case, the largest. And that is how you determine how big your wetland needs to be based upon flow rates that you've calculated for them. We are not going to do that today. All right. But do understand that by doing this, you're way more likely to, one, have a smaller constructed wetland, and two, hit your desired pollutant concentrations by spending less money. Okay? So with that, I'm here to answer any questions we have before we take a short break. We're going to come back from that short break, and I have a 30-minute presentation to share with you on carbon sequestration. So if any questions,